Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Kasper On BI. Finally, another episode. After a long wait, we're back. And today we're going to talk about something really interesting, like Agentic, AI, MCPs, and what it means for Fabric developers / Power BI developers, because there's a lot that has been happening. And really it changes the game on how you can automate things and how you can do things in a certain way as a developer. Like, I'm not talking about AI in the fact of like, hey, I can ask questions, I can do stuff, but what can I do as a developer? And the one that really got me thinking about this is Kurt Buhler. Kurt is an amazing YouTuber. He writes amazing articles. And today we have him on the podcast to really talk about this agentic AI, and especially in the world of developers. How can it help us? What can it do? Tips and tricks, and where can we go? And what is going to be the future here? So I'm really excited about this. I want to learn a lot more. So let's go to the episode and talk to Kurt. So Kurt, amazing to have you on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you about all of this AI agentic stuff. I mean, the world is going at such a tremendously rapid pace that it is really important to talk about these things and also to think about these things. And like, this is why I'm talking to you. I love your videos. I love your content. You're really making people think on like, hey, what are you doing and what's going on, and opening their eyes to possibilities that are right there for you to grasp.
Yeah.
But you just have to know it. So maybe before we go in all of this, let's do a little bit of background from you, because I know you for a while. You're not a typical technical background. So it's also interesting to hear that story a little bit. How did you get here on this stage, and so on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, thanks for having me on here. It's nice to be able to talk about this stuff. It is very interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on. Things are changing, but at the same time, the underlying foundations and processes, what's really important, I think, still remains the same and only becomes more important the more ingredients are added to that pot. So, but yeah, so indeed, I don't have a typical technical background, you could say. So my background is actually in science. So I used to work as a biomedical scientist. I used to work in a laboratory. I did my PhD in biomedical sciences, studying genetics. And then the thing I liked most about doing science is making figures, so analyzing and visualizing the data. So of course, when I heard from someone at my local gym that you could do that as a career, first of all, I didn't believe them. Second of all, I just thought I had to explore that. So I started working actually with Tableau because that was the tool that was shown to me at the time. And eventually I started working as a data visualization consultant, and I started working with Power BI. And then that kind of just leads me to where I am now. So in the beginning, I did not have any real technical background. Like when I was doing my PhD, I did not know what SQL was. One time when I tell this story a lot, but just to frame it, I was once talking with someone about JSON data. They told me I had to get JSON data for something. I had never heard the term JSON data before. I thought they were literally referring to Jason's data. Someone named Jason has data that I have to get. And I mean, that was the level of technical knowledge that I had about these things back then. But I tell this story because I think there's a lot of people who similarly don't have a technical background and have somehow like stumbled into data and BI and discovered all of the different things that make it exciting and interesting, and that's something that's possible today. And it's even more possible, I think, because of the nature of some of this technology. And I think that's something that we in general as BI professionals, as data professionals, need to embrace more, is getting more and more people from those backgrounds to come into this market, to come into this space. So
yeah, I totally agree. It's really interesting to see. When I started in the Power BI team, like it's almost 15 years ago now, it was very different. The MVPs were different. Not all of them, like Marco and those guys, have been around forever, but it was very deep technical. And now there is more like visualization, the art of explaining data and how do you visualize it. And so we see this shift. And we also see this with our users, obviously, because in the past, my users were, when I was a PM, my users were my user was Marco, my user was Chris Webb, and all those guys who are massively smart and really understand how the engine works. And now our users are exactly someone in the business who has an affinity for doing data. So it's really interesting. Yeah. It's also a bit tough. But so let's talk about AI, right? Because and this is how we started this podcast. And like, I think you started this like maybe almost a year ago or something, like already quite a while ago. You started writing some of these YouTube videos and blog posts on AI, and that has kind of evolved into like where you are right now, writing amazing white papers. And I'll put links to all of these things in the description below. But what happened? Like, how did you get started like this, and how did you get on this journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, like I said, like part of this is about enablement, but part of it is also, unfortunately, is also due to the challenges with this technology. I think like a lot of us feel this in the market, that this technology is being brought at an incredibly aggressive pace to the public. And there's not a lot of thought being put into how to communicate that and how to facilitate adoption and how to make sure that everyday people who don't have a technical background can understand what it's capable of and not overselling it. So in the beginning, I was just quite naive about it, and I was very interested in the possibility of being able to overcome a technical barrier that you could have a conversation with your data. And the possibilities that idea facilitated was really interesting and exciting. Seeing the first demo, for example, at Microsoft Build about being able to talk with your data from Microsoft Teams, like that was something that I remember seeing at the time really triggers you, because for a lot of people, that's very cool. Like the idea that you could have that conversation, and particularly to the point that the conversation could go beyond answering a basic question about the data, but also being able to facilitate actual decision-making. So really getting beyond just data analytics, but down to decision analytics. But then when I started using these tools at a certain point last year, I was kind of confronted with the reality of how jagged it actually was. And I started kind of exploring deeply, like, why are they not working like I want them to, or like they're being talked about? And that was kind of what got me started, is I just wanted to try everything and see what is the current state right now. Like if I try this, what is possible, and how difficult is it? How much time and effort do I have to put into this to get it to be useful? And what problems is this going to solve for me right now? Yeah. And that was kind of how I approached it in the beginning. And then I've just continued to explore it further and further and further. And as the technology continues to evolve, like there's new spaces and problems that it's able to address and solve. And it's just kind of been something that's evolved a little bit over time. I think right now, like part of the thing that really motivates me is I want to have a very deep understanding of the capabilities, but also the time and effort investment to be able to get it to do what you want to do, to be useful and to help you. But to really be able to help people understand that and see these capabilities in a height-free way, you know what I mean? Like to really see it in a realistic representation of, there are very cool and very interesting things that you can do. And you can set up these, these interesting conversational BI experiences or this agentic development, but it's going to take some substantial amount of effort and time investment, both at the level of your people and processes, but also in terms of what you actually have to do to facilitate the appropriate ingredients and building blocks to be able to get there. And that's something that's really important to me. So in relation...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. And I'll just tell you a funny story about how I fell into the agent part specifically. Is very funny how I fell into that particular rabbit hole. But go ahead.
No, because I think that's where I was going, right? Because there are so many different ways. Like we're talking about AI here, but what are we really talking about? Because there's the chat with your data. It's the like, hey, I'm just having a conversation with my data, but you're taking it much further into the realm of like, hey, I'm just having I'm having a buddy, an agent sitting next to me who I have a conversation with and who's doing a lot of stuff for me, so I don't have to do it, but I kind of have to train him. Like, just like you get an intern, like you can't just say, okay, you do your stuff, you have to tell him what to do. And that's kind of what you're talking about here, because so maybe you can talk about the agentic, because I'm also a little bit interested to describe to people who are listening, like, what are we really talking about here?
Yeah. So indeed, so to back up a bit, I mean, when you're talking about AI in the context of data and analytics, like typically I like to think about it from consumers and you have creators. Like you have people who are developing and creating semantic models and reports and things that are data products and facilitating the analytical experiences. And then there are the people on the other side that are consuming that. So you have AI that can help you with this kind of conversational BI experience, like I said, where you can really chat with your data. And then you have AI that can help you facilitate the actual development tasks. And we mentioned agents, but there's this kind of delineation between, using ChatGPT when you're just using this chatbot experience and you're producing something that you can kind of copy and paste, or you're having a conversation about your data in that way as well. Or you're using something that, like you said, is more of an agent. So it's able to use these kind of tools to be able to interact with its environment, to retrieve information, to improve its outputs, or to actually take actions in that environment. And that, particularly for the context of development, is very interesting because it can do things for you. And these things can be very simple things like retrieving information in order to answer your question, but also to actually make changes, to change a report, to change a semantic model, to trigger a refresh. And those are just very simple examples. In the more advanced scenarios, it's something that indeed can be sort of like a collaborative partner, you could say, during the development process, but that requires a certain amount of maturity and investment, like I said, to be able to get it there. It is part of it is about that, like you could think about it like training, but I don't think that's necessarily the appropriate way to think about it, but more just how you're going to use it in what particular scenarios, like what information can you give it and what scenarios can you use it for specifically, like batch changes or like a really good example is like you change something in your semantic model, like you rename a measure or something like this, and then you maybe want your agent to go and make a change to all of the objects in the downstream reports or something like this. That kind of small example, let's say.
And then you would just tell the agent to do this automatically. Like when you make a change here, automatically do this, like it triggers.
You can set that up, but it can also not be automatic. It can be ad hoc. Like you could be working, for example, in your development tool, like Power BI or Tabular Editor. You could be working within something like VS Code, and then you make the change in the semantic model, and you realize, oh, I need to change those downstream reports. I renamed that measure, and then you could, if you have set up your tools in the appropriate way, like you have something like Claude Desktop, or you have GitHub Copilot and VS Code, and you have some way for it to communicate with Fabric, for example, or your local files, wherever those reports are, you could just ask it, hey, I made this change in this file. I've renamed this to that. Can you go and rename all of those? And assuming that it has the capabilities to do that, it can go and do that while you continue your work on the model, and then you can review the changes it made afterward. But you can also set it up to do automatically, like an asynchronous agent, so that when you, for example, sync your changes into a remote repository, that it works on something like GitHub Actions, for example, where it could go do that. But that's not necessarily something you need AI for. So, but yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, so because like I remember watching the early episodes, and now I can definitely see the evolution of where you are going and the things that you're playing with and how you're doing it. So maybe you can share that a little bit too, because initially you just started out, as you said before, like, oh, I just want to chat with my data. So you've created something to allow you to chat with the data, and you're using this MCPs. But now you've gone into, okay, this is interesting. So maybe you can describe the journey a bit on what has happened.
Well, it's definitely, it's very funny how it all kind of happened, because back in the beginning, like earlier this year, the whole reason why I started looking at agents to facilitate certain tasks is because I play Dungeons and Dragons, and I have kids and I have work, and I don't have time to prepare my Dungeons and Dragons games, but I really want to keep preparing my Dungeons and Dragons games, but I simply don't have time. So I said, well, AI has to be able to help me in some way. So I started looking at different tools I could use and using voice, speech to text, different tools, so that when I was walking to go pick up my daughter from daycare, I could plan the session and have notes pre-prepared that I could review. And I thought, well, I need to do very specific tasks that I want to facilitate. And so I set up MCP servers to be able to do that, to do something like create monsters or to create magic items at the time. And so it was this kind of gateway into, this is going to help me do what I want to do. And it was super helpful where I was able to do that. And at a certain moment, it just triggered where I just thought, well, what I'm doing for like my hobby, for my D&D game, this is something I could just apply this to Power BI. Like I have similar challenges with, my Power BI or Fabric environment. I'm just programmatically accessing different, different tools and different environments. I could do something similar for like a Power BI semantic model, for example.
Yeah.
And it was the thing that really blew me away is how easy it was. Like how in literally 40 minutes, I could set up a basic MCP server that could use the Power BI REST APIs to be able to query the semantic model. And from there, it was just kind of, where is the line? Like, what can't I do? And that's really kind of what started me on there.
I totally agree. This is the interesting part. Like I'm having this conversation with people in the team too all the time. And like the biggest problem with AI is like, it's your imagination, right? It is like the things that you can ask it to do. Like sometimes you just think like I actually got a subscription. I don't know why I got this subscription, but I got it from my internet provider for Perplexity. Like they just pay a premium bill for me, and it's really great for researching. And sometimes I'm just asking it, okay, let me just ask it. And then it comes back with this amazing research and answers and like all these things. And it's like, oh my God, I wish I just would have thought before to just think about this question. Okay, so maybe one step back, because you were touching on something, and I'm not sure everyone here that's listening to this episode knows, but you started with MCPs. Like this is the original, when we started this session too, we were talking about MCPs. Maybe you can explain a little bit what is an MCP, because there's a lot of hype around MCPs.
Right.
I open YouTube, and because I watch some of these things, everything is MCP. So maybe you can explain a little bit what this is.
Yeah. So if you think about something that you're using, like you're using ChatGPT or whatever, you're just using like a kind of out of the box model experience. Like you're just limited to basically what that specific model can do. What is in its training data, what you provide in terms of your prompt, and what kinds of tools it maybe has available out of the box. Like you mentioned Perplexity, being able to do a web search, for example, like most of these tools have this capability now. But the cool and interesting thing with MCP is it has this kind of, it's an open protocol where you can extend the capabilities of the LLM to be able to retrieve information like context to improve its outputs, to make them more useful, and to be able to actually take actions with those tools in that external environment. So an MCP server has tools that allow it to interact with its external environment. It has resources, which is kind of like a built-in context that you can use, and it has prompts that you can reuse as well. But when most people are talking about MCP servers, they're mainly referring to the tools that it has available. And the whole interesting thing about that is if you have something like you're using Claude Desktop or you're using some kind of AI application, and you want it to be able to interact with something else, some kind of information or external system that you have for whatever purpose. Like I want to be able to know how many Fabric workspaces I have to be able to give it a way to see and get that information. So an easy way to do that is with MCP servers, but it's not the only way to do that though. And that's kind of the thing that I notice now is MCP servers are so interesting because it is so easy to just kind of like add an MCP server. And there's so many that are becoming available for things like Fabric, but also...
The only thing you need to do is like you need to give it a way to get to information. Like for example, and I've seen in the examples, the one you're using is the one that Santosh also created, one of my colleagues. I'll put the link in the description below. Like it is a wrapper around the APIs that are available in Fabric, right? That's kind of
it. It is and it isn't though. So if you just wrap, like for example, the workspaces API, and you just say like, okay, list workspaces, and that's all you do, most of the time you're not going to get the correct number of workspaces. So when you ask it, for example, tell me how many workspaces I have, and it's just a wrapper around the API, what it's going to actually do is it's going to call that API. It's going to get the list of workspaces. It reads that into context, and then you're relying on the LLM to count. And LLMs are very bad at counting because they don't count. So then you get a wrong answer. So if I have 80 workspaces, sometimes it'll tell me 78, sometimes it'll tell me 82. And so if you're just wrapping the APIs without thinking about the actual questions that people are asking, then often you're going to end up with quite problematic results from the MCP server tool. And the problem with that is that the user won't even know, because there's no way for them to validate that unless they check. So for example, like that was when I started exploring MCP servers, that was one thing that I kind of was confronted with. Is the first thing that I wanted to be able to do is I want to format reports. Like I waste an ungodly amount of time formatting reports. And I want to cut that into like 5% in however I can. I don't care. And as I was kind of exploring this area, I was starting to realize, like, unless you really think hard about the specific scenarios and use cases and questions that you're going to be confronted with, and you integrate that into your tools, both in terms of the response as well as the actual code, then you're going to end up with results that might miss the mark completely, or that are deceptively incorrect. Like the workspaces example. So how you solve that problem, for example, is you actually count the workspaces with code and return the number. So the LLM just reads the number.
Yeah, and that's something you can tell the MCP server to do. No, is that the way to think about it?
Yeah, like if you're making an MCP server, you're making your own tools, then you have to think about that. And you have to, for example, like you're setting it up, let's say in Python, and you're having it call the API. You have to think, okay, I'm going to create this list workspaces tool, but what is the user going to ask about this tool? Are they just going to say, tell me my workspaces, or tell me what workspace, or find a workspace? In that case, maybe that's all you need to do is wrap the API. But it's very logical to expect that someone's going to ask, how many workspaces do I have? How many workspaces are development or production? So then you think, well, I need to give it a way to count, and I need to give it a way to filter that list. So then you alter the Python code such that you have an argument that will provide some kind of filter criteria, and you also have it count and return the number, perhaps also breaking it down by capacity or something like this, so that all the LLM has to do is read the response, which is from the Python code that was executed, to be able to see that number 83. That's how many workspaces you have, and then you're gonna 99% of the time, then you're gonna get that correct number. Not 100%, but at least 99. Yeah, so that's one way to think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then so that's one thing, right? That's MCP on top of, and it kind of feels like, I don't know if you ever played with data agents inside of Fabric, but it's kind of the same thing there, right? So you need to really, you don't need to tell it, but you will get some wrong results for sure. Like that's the nature of where we are. But you can fine tune it. It's like, hey, if someone asks this question, make sure you return this type of result, and then it will learn, become better and better and better at answering questions that people are going to ask. So it's really interesting to see. It's the same thing as I was saying before. Like when you get a new employee, you need to tell him where to find stuff and how to do things and what. Like I remember when I joined Microsoft 15 years ago, we love our acronyms. There are like if you go to a meeting or something, like there's 500 million acronyms that nobody you have to learn. You have to understand what these things mean and what the context is around it. And so I kind of see it in the same way.
It is. And there's so many things I want to talk about on that line. So it's about communication at the end of the day. And it's about having empathy, honestly, with whatever's on the other side. Like when I'm talking to you and I'm telling you something, I need to give you sufficient context to be able to understand what I'm saying. And if I'm not giving you sufficient context, or I'm giving you too much context, which I sometimes tend to do because I'm a verbose person, then you are less likely to be able to understand what I'm saying and to be able to, answer back in a way that I might expect. And it's the same thing with an agent. So you have to think about, what information do I have to provide in order for you to understand this? I have to provide you sufficient information to do what I expect, but I cannot provide you too much information. And that is something that is shown in a lot of the research, is if you provide too much context, then performance decays with this failure state that's called context rot. And if you provide too much tools, like too many MCPs tools. So one of the things I've seen people do is they get really excited about MCP and then they have like 100 or 200 tools. And I've done that. So, and then what happens is it gets confused and it doesn't know what tool to use. But what's interesting is, and what I want to mention is that this exists at so many different levels. Like, so first you mentioned about, for example, that it can give you wrong results. And that's true because of the nature of the non-determinism. But what's cool about the agents, and especially when you're using something like with Claude Desktop, for example, you see this very well with the Sonnet model, is that it operates in this loop and it's very good at tool calling and it will correct itself. So if it tries to execute a DAX query and it gets a result that is an error or that is actually quite strange, it will run a different query or it will retrieve the model definition. But you can actually fine tune this kind of like how the agent goes through that loop, much like how you would when you're talking with a person, because in your tool responses, you can actually suggest, hey, next, I suggest you use this tool. Like if someone is using, like I have an MCP server to evaluate reports, and when someone is listing the number of pages, you can put in that output, like, after you list the pages, you maybe want to explore the visuals, or you maybe want to evaluate whether there are too many pages. And you can put that in the output as context, dynamic context for the agent in the tool response. So there's so many different ways to be able to control this.
It's kind of funny. I'm using Copilot quite a lot to write some code, and like it's been a long time since I wrote code, so now I decided, okay, I'm going to do it again with the help of Copilot. And it's kind of funny to sometimes see that it's going into the wrong direction. Like you can see it, like it's going into the wrong direction, and then I just tell him like, hey, dude, stop. I think you're going into the wrong direction. I think we should go this way to start debugging something. And he says, oh yeah, you're absolutely right. And then it goes into the other direction to do it. So it's pretty cool to see how smart it is.
Yeah, but what's important to keep in mind too is like it's ephemeral, right? So you can correct it, but then it will then like keep go in the right direction for the rest of that conversation.
Yeah.
But then the moment that session ends, unless you've documented that in like the Copilot instructions or some kind of agent documentation, then it's going to keep going in that off direction. So what's really cool is that you can say like, you kind of have to orchestrate it like that. And then you either have to yourself kind of add that into the instructions to prevent it from doing that. Like it's this iterative incremental process, or you can actually ask it to explain to itself in the document to say like, please explain, why you went on this path and how you could avoid that in the future. And then you maybe review and revise that, something like that.
Actually, sometimes one of the things I do is I actually have a conversation with Copilot to tell him like, hey, I'm going to do this in Copilot for writing code. Can you suggest a prompt for me? And then it becomes very like specific, like you should say this, and then I can tweak it, and then I feed it into Copilot. And then I've seen like, especially if you want to do big things, like, hey, I want you to refactor the whole thing because you made a mess out of it. We're going to refactor it. And you ask him like, hey, I want you to write a prompt for your own Copilot on how to do it. And it comes up with and you learn a lot from it because, as you said before, like the way you ask questions and to giving the right amount of context and the expectations, what is the output that you're expecting? If you tell it to do that more clearly, but not too much, you'll get better results.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely something that's good, but I think you have to also keep in mind too, like, and this is something that I experienced a lot, especially like a couple months ago, is that when you get the AI to kind of help you create the prompts, that very often you can end up in this situation where you're seeing patterns and things that it's doing that you think are making the prompt better, but then in reality, it's very hard to measure whether that's actually resulting in better results. And you can kind of draw these patterns and conclusions that are not necessarily correct. And you can also get into this circumstance, and this is especially true with the coding line agents, where it's easy to kind of lose track of what the agent is doing, where you get it to say, hey, create some instructions or create a markdown document that explains how this works. And then you maybe don't review it. You just kind of trust that the agent, produces something that will be useful for itself. And then it just kind of spirals out of control, like goes through this failure spiral. So I think it's very important to kind of make sure that you still keep a close rein on it, and that everything that's being done and said still aligns with your intent, your authorial intent and expectations to some extent.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's take one step. I mean, not back, but probably more forward on how do we make sure we actually, like, what is the practicality? So let's say I'm someone from Power BI, and I'm a Power BI developer for a long time, and I'm looking at this episode, and these two guys are talking about MCPs and AI and all this stuff. But let's put it down to like, hey, I'm a Power BI developer. How is this going to change how I do work going forward? What are some practical examples?
Yeah. So this is where I like to think of it in terms of like these scenarios. So we wrote an article on SQLBI and a white paper discussing these 4 different scenarios. And this is kind of what we see is starting to emerge just from like a segmentation point of view. And these scenarios are not mutually exclusive. And there's no scenario that's like better than one another, something like this. It's more of a gradient. But to talk about these 4 different scenarios, I'll try to frame it in that context. So scenario 1 is like the kind of traditional chatbot experience. So you're using something like ChatGPT, or you're using something like Claude Desktop or Copilot, but you're engaging with the data and it's producing some kind of output, but it's just the out-of-the-box experience, and you're leaning very heavily on your prompts. Like this is kind of the first scenario, and I think a lot of people are quite familiar with this, like using it to help you be able to generate some DAX code or a background image for your report. And then you as the user kind of copy that and you paste it into a tool and you evaluate it or change it. I think that's something that can be interesting for a lot of people, and for helping you be able to, do things like generating code for certain circumstances, like some Power Query or DAX in limited scenarios. But then you're still kind of dependent on providing it that context manually from your prompt, so to speak. So in that first scenario, it's very easy to kind of do. And like I said, I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with that. And it can be useful in those limited scenarios. But you're still like, it's really front heavy. Like you really have to give it sometimes a lot of context in the prompt, which takes a lot of time. And debatably, that's not necessarily going to be worth your time to do that. And it might be a better investment for you to just better understand the problem and try to work on it yourself first. The second scenario is augmenting these chatbot experiences. And that's when you start shifting the effort away from your prompt and into context. So curating context, which is just the information you're providing the LLM that it's getting from other sources aside from your prompt to be able to improve its outputs. And context could be like markdown documents or instructions. And you can do that, for example, like in Claude Desktop projects. You can give instructions also in Power BI now with the semantic model. So you can also give instructions you're talking about GitHub Copilot, like the Copilot instructions. Yeah. But curating those instructions so that you're kind of tailoring it to your scenario. But even being able to give it visibility on something like your semantic model, something like your reports. And that's where something like MCP Server can really come in handy, because you can give it manual context yourself, but you could also be able to let the tool, the LLM, get the context when it needs it, because you can't anticipate all the possible context it needs. Like web search is a basic example of that, but being able to get information from Fabric is another example of that.
And
And
what
this is
what type of context are we talking about? Like, how would I see this?
let's say, yeah, so let's say that you are doing something like you're developing a semantic model, or you're maybe developing a report, and you need to create some kind of, measure that's going to do something like calculating the cumulative sales by workdays or something like this. And you know that that's already implemented in other semantic models in some way in your tenant, or that there is, for example, reports that show similar information, like a month to date line chart. And you could explain that or take screenshots and put that in your prompt. But if you could just give the AI a way to just get that information, so that you could just tell it, hey, it's in the daily sales model, or it's visualized in the daily tracker report in the line chart, you could just say that in the prompt. And if it has an MCP server and you tell it, where to find that, it can just go get it. It can go retrieve the definition from that model, or it could go retrieve the definition of the visual from the report, so that it better understands, okay, this is similar to how it was done in a different model, and this is similar to how the user wants to visualize it, for instance. So that's some simple examples, for instance, of how you might use that. Another example is, like I said, I talked about you rename something in your semantic model. Maybe while you're working on the semantic model, you need to make like a pretty big refactoring, and you just want to check, what reports are using this semantic model. You could just ask the AI then, can you quickly check what reports are connected to this semantic model? And if you have a tool that allows it to do that, it can just retrieve that information relatively quickly and easily, so that you can inform a decision that you're making to facilitate your development. Of course, it can do certain development changes for you, but that's kind of moving into that third scenario beyond this second scenario, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's always like an example I have for my own personal and not necessarily for Power BI related is like, I'm using a lot of like AI to do, like one of my hobbies is also photography. And so I have a AI session going on where I give it prompts like, I have this camera, I have these lenses, and then I'm asking like, hey, I'm going to this place. Where should I go to take nice pictures, and what should I do? And like, can you give me some tips? And then it knows like, oh, you have this camera, and you probably should take this lens, and these are maybe the settings you should play with. And so it knows more than in me just asking. It kind of knows more of what's going on. So that's quite cool.
Yeah, it is. It is cool. And I think, though, if I was to tell someone like who's starting to explore these, like these first two scenarios, for example, the chatbots and augmented chatbots, like when you're using these AI tools, it's really important that you have a good understanding of the fact that this is not a truth machine. Like, this is not something that you should just take at face value, and that typically it's something that you're going to get better results the more you're approaching it with this kind of critical thinking mindset and skepticism, that it might suggest for you to do something and to go to this particular place, but you maybe have other implicit information or understanding or intent that, you just think like, well, no, I don't actually think that makes sense. And you can provide that information then in the chat to try to get those better results, but at least it's going to get you thinking. Like one of the areas where I think this kind of technology can really help, especially if people have this critical thinking and a certain amount of maturity of how they understand, the data and the processes, is in the ambiguous problem spaces, to kind of help them collaboratively think through a particular problem. So when you're designing a semantic model, like I'll revisit the example I mentioned before, you're trying to do a DAX calculation where you're trying to accumulate the total sales by workdays month to date. But then you have a problem when you want to compare to the previous year, because the previous year, the number of workdays in a month is not going to be the same as the number of workdays of that same month this year. So how do you solve that problem? And there's not necessarily going to be like a single best correct answer, depending on your scenario and your preferences. So you could maybe think through that problem with the LLM, providing it sufficient context, and it will suggest things to you. and you can disagree with it, but it's going to help you to think, oh yeah, I didn't consider that. And maybe the LLM even says this, like you could use same period last year, and you weren't even thinking about that yet. You just wanted to get that first measure going. So then you add the same period last year as well, and you realize like, hey, these lines don't line up. Why is that? And then you ask the LLM and it suggests like, oh, well, the number of workdays aren't the same. And you're like, I didn't think about that. And that's this kind of thinking space and helping you understand the problem can be very, very beneficial. And it can be kind of like this self-instructional tool that can also facilitate your learning. But if you're new to Power BI and you're new to working with data and analytics, and you're still early in your career, this can be a bit dangerous, and it can be a bit deceptive, because you might not necessarily think about this, and you might just take it at face value, and that can be a little bit dangerous, because then you might be lured into doing certain things without understanding why. For example, like if I was new to Power BI and I see that those lines don't exactly overlap, I might just think like, well, it's different. It's last year. And then I implement it and I move on. And you realize it weeks down the road,
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so maybe like you were talking about a lot of the concrete as an example. So what was one of the most surprising things for you when you started playing with this and you thought like, oh my God, this is like, wow.
There were two moments that I remember very vividly. So the first is like the first time I made an MCP server to really like query the semantic model, the fact that I could do it in 40 minutes. And like I said, I don't have a technical background. Like I used AI to help me create the Python code that I needed to be able to get the MCP server going. And then I modified that code to do what I want. And the fact that I could get it going so quickly and easily, but then how well it worked, like how I could really scrutinize those results and see, using Claude Desktop, for example, to see that it would correct itself when it would produce queries that were wrong, or that were producing results that didn't make sense. And just seeing how quickly and easily that could work. And the first time I tested it was in a semantic model that didn't even have measures. So it had no measures, it had no preparation for AI, nothing. And just by kind of correcting and steering in that single session, that I was able to already kind of get something that was useful. And that was something that really surprised me, is that reasoning capability. So the fact that it could get multiple queries to answer a single question, and that it would really operate on these tools in a loop, like more agentically thus. So that was kind of the thing that really surprised me. And then extending that, of course, to scenarios where you're modifying the report metadata, and like for formatting and stuff like this, it was very cool. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was the first time I used Claude Code. And I'm laughing because the first time I used Claude Code, like it felt like I was on drugs or something. Like it was just mind-boggling. Like when you have an agent in the terminal, it's an agent that's being able to execute commands arbitrarily, and you can spin up multiple terminals, so you can have multiple instances of this coding agent working at the same time. And you can give it access to MCP servers, but you can also give it access to like command line tools, like the Fabric command line or the GitHub command line, and you can tell it how to use those things. And what's really cool about that is it's official. So it's something that's already exists from Microsoft, and so it negates a lot of the concerns with MCP servers, and it already wraps all of the APIs. And you can do really crazy things. So the thing that really blew me away then is I created several specialized agents that create reports, basically, based off of a set of instructions. So I could give it a Figma mockup, and I could say, assemble the report, and it could assemble the metadata files, and I could have a functional PBIP file based off of the Figma mockup that it could view with an MCP server, and the information it could get from my Fabric tenant using the Fabric command line. And just seeing that happen was really quite remarkable. But of course, it's very important for me to say that it's not going to create your reports or your semantic models for you. it was just a test to see how far can I push this. Is this possible? You know,
I mean, it's also great for things like some of your examples that you give. Like, okay, I want to do a quick mock-up. You know, here's Figma, like feed it into the report and do something for me, or like this is the like I love that same example. Like, here's what it kind of needs to look like. You do quick sketch, and then give me the basics, give me the framework of the report, or this is what all the colors need to be. You go ahead. So it saves some of that time and it saves some of that effort. But it's so that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. Like the first things that I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to like copy conditional formatting from like one column to another, because that's not something you can do in the user interface of Power BI. And it's quite time consuming to do if you need to do it. And it's not something that you can easily do as a human programmatically either, because of how nested the JSON is. But because LLMs can read JSON quite well, and it just sees, oh, this is the conditional formatting, I just have to shift this over to another column, it can do it very quickly. So being able to do those kind of modifications or to adjust that formatting on the fly can be very good. But it runs into problems when it doesn't have an example. And you ask it to do something like, hey, I want to create a bullet chart. And there is no bullet chart in Power BI. But most people who create reports know that you could do that in a number of different ways by kind of bending the visuals. And the LLM doesn't know that. And that's very hard to tell it how you would do that. So you're not going to succeed in getting an LLM to do that, unfortunately. And that's kind of where it runs into problems. And that's kind of the pain points that I think people might, once they start to get more, but not proficient, but they start to explore this technology and get to the point where they're like, whoa, I can do these little things. This is really cool. But now I want to create this visual. On paper, this visual is incredibly simple. But then when I try to get the LLM to make it for me, it won't. And it's very, very hard without giving it a very literal example for it to do that. And that's just kind of how it is.
So let's make it again a bit more concrete. So let's say I'm a Power BI developer, right? Because we're only talking about Power BI developers. We're not talking really for business users. Like, that's a different story. Today we're really talking about developers and people actually like building BI stuff. Like, let's say we listened to this conversation and said, oh my God, and the first thing I would recommend anyone to start, I would say, because in your YouTube, you kind of take us along on the journey. It's kind of funny. Okay, I found out this. Oh my God, this is amazing. And then next week, Kurt is back. It's like, oh my God, now I found out this. And then this is kind of how the YouTube series went, and I love it. So you kind of take us along. So that's kind of the evolution, maybe, that if you want to learn more about how this stuff works and what are that journey along is actually quite interesting for me to see, and probably for other people too, to learn on like what's going on. But if without watching I don't know how many hours it is, it's probably quite a bit, but without watching all of this, what would you tell people to do? Like, hey, I want to get started on this. I want to start playing with this. And I want to see if it can actually improve my life.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we tried to do with this latest article and white paper from SQLBI. The purpose is, we know that the vast majority of people have maybe experimented with this scenario one, the chatbots, and they've used, for helping generate DAX and things like this, but things are moving so quickly and it's impossible to keep up and to know what there is available, especially outside of like the traditional BI ecosystem and outside of like the Microsoft tools, for example. So what we tried to do is to give you a very strong foundation, and okay, this is how this underlying technology works. Like, this is how an LLM works. And there's things like non-determinism and hallucinations, and these are examples. But then kind of walking through the different building blocks. Like, you have the model, you have the context, you have your prompt, you have tools, you have your environment. Why are these building blocks? What do they do? And what choices would you have to make if you want to use them? And then walking through these 4 different scenarios. Scenario 1, where you're just using a chatbot. Scenario 2, where you augment it with context and tools. Scenario 3, where now the AI can actually directly change files with something like GitHub Copilot or an agent that's in the command line. And scenario 4, where the agent is no longer under your supervision and it's working autonomously in the background, and you do something like just tag it in an issue, a GitHub issue, and then it goes and actually could make a change, but it could also just review something and come back with information. So in that white paper, in that article, we try to give you an overview of, okay, these are the scenarios we see. These are the things that are interesting and important. And then from there, I think what's really important is to understand, like, there's no rush, there's no curve, there's no race. You don't need to start using this stuff today. There's no mandate, but it is worth exploring. Like, it is worth kind of just trying it for yourself. And what I do is every day between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., I do one different thing related to AI. And I try out, for example, I'll try like a new local model, or I'll try a new tool, or I'll try a specific scenario that I have in mind. And the moment it hits 9, I stop, and then I take notes about, was this successful? Was this interesting? If not, why? If it was really cool, I might make a video about it. But I think just kind of doing that, like consistently doing little tests and kind of evaluating it and seeing, is this something that could be useful for me? And if not, why?
But so how are you thinking about it, right? Because
further?
I think, going back to what I said earlier, the biggest problem is our own imagination. Coming up with the scenarios that it can help you in. Like I think so. Some of your videos have some amazing scenarios, like, oh my God. And then you start thinking, and then you start. So how do you come up with the ideas?
You need to be, in my opinion, I think it's really critical to be problem focused, and not technical problem focused, but just in terms of like, where do I lose time? Where do I get frustrated? Where do I experience pain? For me, it's formatting visuals a lot of the time. Just because like I really just want to spend less time on that task. So if I could find a way to do that, then that's very interesting. And it's also just, is it possible? So in part, I think your curiosity is one thing, but you have to really keep it narrow. Like I've seen a lot of people be really interested in like, oh, can AI make a semantic model? And if you're thinking that way, I think you're getting a bit distracted from what the actual problems are. Don't think big like that, and don't think unrealistic like that, because AI is not going to make your semantic model, especially devoid from like a requirements gathering process. Think more specifically, like we know we have DAX UDFs coming out, right? So DAX UDFs are going to lead to a lot of refactoring of your DAX code. So one potential thing, starting from the beginning, how can you talk with your LLM about DAX UDFs and say, where in my model could I use a DAX UDF? Help me, let's think through this process. And maybe that's something you spend an hour on, and just because that's an interesting problem, because DAX UDFs are new. There's no public information available about them aside from what's been communicated at conferences. So how are you going to be able to tell the model with context what a DAX UDF is and why it would be useful and how it works? So that's going to teach you how do you give good context to your AI tool. And you could just focus on that alone, like just trying to get that working so that it's producing things that make sense. For example, referencing documentation or giving it your own notes. And the second thing is, how are you going to let it see your model? Are you going to just give it a BIM file, or what is it going to work better with Tyndall? And then maybe you then want to walk that path a little bit farther, and you do that and you're successful, and you identify like 2 or 3 scenarios where you're like, hey, I could really improve my model by using DAX UDFs in these 3 scenarios. So, but that's going to take you a lot of time and effort, right? To do that refactoring. So could the AI do that for me? Like, it's quite a repetitious task. It's like a singular pattern of replacement and refactoring. Makes sense. So how would you do that?
Yeah, so
like
I think
that's kind of
going
way
back
to think about it.
I think probably going back to what you said earlier is also like getting to understand how to have a conversation with the AI. Like as you said, like how does it need to learn? Like, and actually really interesting, and I'll put it in also in the link of the description below. one of the things I'm learning too is like, and because I work, we have a lot of emails, we have a lot of meetings. So
Yeah.
I'm learning how to use AI by using my co-pilot from work. And actually really interesting, Satya just did a blog post, I think it was last week or the week before. It's like, these are the 5 or 6 prompts that I use every day in preparation for a meeting. And he's really specific on what he's asking for. Like, hey, I have a meeting that's coming up next with this person. Like, can you help me provide this, this, and this? So again, who would have thought that you would be able to? And actually, it's like, I had a discussion with a colleague earlier, and I was asking, like, okay, based on all the emails and all the chats that it has access to, and all the documents that I have access to, that he has access to, I was asking, okay, can you give me the opinion of this person about this topic? And it wrote a whole like document, like based on this, and he says this, and going about this. So again, like, what are the problems, or what are the things that you need to do, and how do you actually have a conversation with your AI? And I think that's probably the most important part.
Yeah, I think, and like I said too, it's like bringing the critical thinking, bringing the skepticism is like super important as well. So everything the AI gives you back, that you are more skeptical about it than if you're, you know, a stranger would to tell you the same information. You have to be very, very skeptical and very critical, just so that, because it will give you information that will be potentially incorrect or in very subtle ways. Like an example is when you could be using like the Microsoft Docs MCP server, which is a fantastic tool, very useful way like to give AI context from the like the official documentation, or to be able to search something yourself. But if you just experiment with that yourself and you ask 5 times, you ask a question like, what storage modes are there for Power BI? You will notice that each of those 5 times, it will get you a slightly different result, and it will sometimes leave out options. It might leave out Direct Lake. It might leave out, hybrid tables or something like this. And that's not necessarily that it's incorrect. It's just it's extracting information and it's presenting it in a different context of the chat, other than the docs. But if you know this ahead of time, and you decide, well, I'm going to ask it twice, or once I get that information, then I can go and I can check the source because it links to a document, then it's still saving you time and you're not falling victim to those fallacies. So I think coming back to your example of like useful prompts, what's really useful is if you can have reusable prompts. So you save those prompts in some kind of way, either in a document that you reference, or in like a MCP servers have some reusable prompts that you can use. But being able to find a way to reuse prompts specifically for these kind of more complex prompts or like daily tasks can be very, very helpful, I think. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of cool things.
Yeah, and then so again, going back to like let's say I'm a developer and I want to get started with this, like using the CLI to talk to, like understanding the requirements, and then using the CLI, using like Claude Code or Copilot to be able to talk to it and just see where it goes, right? And kind of understand, like, as you said, be critical of like, hey, I'm asking this question, it's coming up with this result. Like, what is it doing?
Yeah, exactly. So, and just kind of defining like these little problems that are going to, usually like the way I think about it is, like when I'm doing these 1 hour little experiments, is I'll try to define like, what's the problem? Like the example I gave, like how can I give the model sufficient context about a new topic, like a new DAX topic, that it will be able to help me do something like search my model. But you should try to think of problems that are going to be still, that even while you're investing in that it's going to help you in a specific area. So while you're doing that task, for example, you're also going to learn about like DAX UDFs, because you're going to have to curate this information and you're going to have to make it correct. So it's helping you in 2 different ways, one that's related to AI and one that's not. And that's a good way to kind of think about it, is not to just focus on only cases of like, how can I get AI to do this cool thing? But how can I do this in a way that's going to help me advance in some kind of like professional or personal goal? And you gave a really good example of that with like your photography, for instance. Because by going through that exercise, you're learning about AI, but at the same time, you're also kind of like advancing specific goals and interests that you have with relation to your photography hobby.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool way to apply it.
Yeah. I'm trying this with all kinds of different things. So that's definitely really cool. Yeah, that's definitely a lot of cool stuff there. Okay, so we're getting to the end of it. Where do you expect this is going to go? Like, I know it's incredibly hard to predict anything around this area and anything around this space, but where do you think this is going to go? Like, I know it's impossible to say, like, even 1 year from now, but like, what is your hunch? And even more importantly, what would you tell the Power BI developers out there to look at, to think about?
I think it comes back to like what I said. I think it's so if you're just kind of like hearing this and this is something that kind of piques your interest and you know, it doesn't matter if it's something that you're skeptical about or you're excited about and you want to get started tomorrow. I think the first thing that you need to do is to think about your processes in terms of like, how can we look at something like permissions, some kind of permissions control over who has access to what? How can I set up like a requirements gathering process so that I can better understand the requirements for semantic models and reports? I should probably start using like the Power BI project format and the TIMDL and the PBIR formats. All of these kind of things don't directly have to do with AI, but they're going to help you use AI and agents. Because, for example, like the PBIP format is necessary because that's how the AI can be able to, you know, better read those files. And if you want to programmatically modify them with AI or without AI, then you need to use that format, for example. So if you're not already using that today, then maybe that's where you should start looking at first is how do I start switching from PBIX to PBIP, for instance? Or how do I start using Git integration? Because once you're using the Git integration, you can connect your remote repository to your AI tool to be able to give it context of that repository, for instance. So focusing on these kind of things is already going to help make it so that you can better leverage these technologies. Because if you just focus like right away and you just start saying, oh, we're going to go Claude Code, give it the CLI, you're going to have a bad time. Because it's
going back to what you said
add
earlier
AI
too,
on top.
Think about the scenario. So like what you're saying, like what annoys me the most, and how can I see how it can be improved? Like, and it's something like, and mostly like the repetitiveness. Like if it's a repetitive task, is it something that you need to do a lot? That takes a lot of manual steps and things. Okay, these are interesting things to potentially look for, right? As a project.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's important. So if you have a good understanding of like the pain points of the development process and like little opportunities on like where can this help you? What kind of problems exist that this could potentially solve? Like, don't just look at the technology and just think this would be cool to do this with AI instead of by myself. I think that's the wrong way to look at it, especially like revisiting what I said before and talking about like, oh, how can I get AI to make my semantic model or to write my DAX? Like, don't think about it like that, because then it'll waste a lot of time and resources and you're not going to get results that you're satisfied with. It makes more sense to really scope it specifically to particular problem areas where it can bring that value and it can help you out. And it can, going back to like the original comments earlier in this conversation, like it can be a partner for your development, but in a way that's going to augment you and not try to get in the way of what you're already doing successfully.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, so maybe the last question, maybe it's not necessarily AI related, but we can already talked about some of the AI, the DAX UDF functions and things like this. What are you very excited for in Fabric? Or maybe something that is just released or is about to be released that we're allowed to say?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think are interesting to think about. So I'm curious and interested to see how Copilot can evolve looking at some of these capabilities of MCP servers. Like, for example, like with Copilot right now, when you chat with your data, that it just will send like a single query and then retrieve the data back. It will be interesting to see in the future if it will work more with this kind of reasoning flow, like you see when you're using something like Claude Desktop, because then you can have this more kind of back and forth, so to speak. And especially if it's able to better leverage like the visualization capabilities that exist inside of the tool to show this inside of visuals. I think that's something that I'm very curious and interested about. Yeah. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question. So,
no, but I mean,
but I'm curious to see how that evolves.
Nobody can, like, if you see the rate of innovation in this space, it's mind-boggling, and nobody knows what's going to happen in a month or in 2 months, and like all the things that are happening. But it is quite interesting to see the like chat with your data and those experiences, because like, yeah, it needs work. Like it's not like PBIP file. You said, as you rightly said, it's simple because it's metadata. It's easy for an AI to understand. Any of like code is easy because like you kind of know, you have a reference, like this is what it's supposed to look like, and I kind of understand what it looks like. But when you actually have to do data and you have to understand intent, like from a business user, like, hey, I'm asking for this, like the AI is not a real human. Cannot really think. The only thing it knows is what it can see. And
right.
As you said before, when it starts to become a bit more reasoning, like, hey, having a discussion on things will get more interesting. So yeah, I totally agree. It'll be very interesting to see how this is going to go.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to see more attention put on the adoption side as well, because this is something that's very new. It's new for all of us, like we who are in the technical space, who are very deep and up to our eyeballs in it. Like even for us, it's very overwhelming, and it's very confusing in terms of how do you use it appropriately. So you can only imagine, like for the average business user, how they must feel, and how they're kind of confronted with those realities when they have certain expectations that have been built up over time, and then it doesn't perform to those expectations because it's not designed to, it's not supposed to. When they're asking, detailed questions that go beyond the purview of the data. But once users can get a good understanding of what's possible, and they can, for example, like understand, okay, I can explore the data in a much more free-form way using this. For example, after I look at the report, and then I want to see that data from a different perspective, rather than like connecting to the semantic model and trying to create something in Power BI Desktop, which for a lot of people is still quite complicated and challenging. Then they can just ask a question, or even be able to do it from a mobile phone, and that can be quite convenient and empowering. So once that AI literacy and adoption is something that's supported to some extent, like invested in different organizations, then people will be able to do a lot more interesting things with it. So that'll be really cool to see.
I agree, because I definitely see it. It happens in a lot of, like, I don't know, I'll put the link to that in the description below, but there's a podcast I usually listen to. It's called Hard Fork from the New York Times. I don't know if you ever listened to it. It's really good because they talk about like they are next level on all the new AI stuff and what's going on. But one of the interesting episodes that was on there is also, they were talking about when ChatGPT 5 came out, and people were like not happy at all because like, hey, the tone has changed, and like nothing was the same anymore. And then the discussion there on the podcast was about like, hey, we're shipping, and like we're not even caught up to the old way of doing things. And like it's really interesting, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of like when Power BI started, right? Like, okay, we're just turning on Power BI for the whole organization and kind of hope for the best. And then we started like talking about people like, hey, you need a center of excellence. And Matthew wrote this amazing document and white paper all the way in the beginning on like, hey, as an organization, here's what you should think about. And some bigger organizations started to think about it. And I think the same way we need to do for AI too, like for an organization. You can just turn it on. Like us techies, yeah, we are interested in it. We watch YouTube videos on how this works and what goes along. But a person who's going to the job and like is a nurse or like they don't care. They care about treating patients and they care about caring for patients and not necessarily on how this can improve their lives.
No, indeed. And there's a lot of parallels, I think, between like the kind of the early waves of like the self-service BI tools and the early waves of these AI tools in terms of what they promise and what they might deliver. And I think the lessons that we learned from these self-service tools and the pains that a lot of organizations endured, that a lot of it boiled down to adoption and executive endorsement and change management. Like these are things that have not changed. And if anything, they become more important. And yet the conversation still revolves very heavily around technical concepts. And that's something that's, I think, going to catch up to a lot of people, because even when you have everything working really well and it produces the results in a closed box, it produces all the results you want. If you don't have a process around it to facilitate the change and the adoption, it's still not necessarily going to deliver business value. And I see this still all the time with like Power BI reports, where people will create these reports that are beautiful and elegant and amazing. And I look at it and I'm like, how did you create that? But no one is using it because it was built in a box and it's not addressing those problems. And people haven't even been trained how to use the reports. It's the same thing with AI to some extent, to many extents.
Makes sense. Well, Kurt, thank you so much for your time. I'll put all the links in the description below. People who want to follow up, there's lots and lots of stuff to content and to look for and to read on. I really want to thank you for your time and keep on writing and blogging and sharing your amazing ideas with us all so we can get some amazing ideas. So again, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So take care.
And that concludes another episode of Kasper On BI. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely did. A lot of interesting discussions. Lots and lots of things to talk about. I'll put all the links in the descriptions below. I hope this kind of gives you a general idea of like the world of AI, what is possible, how are things going, how does it work? Because there's just, like as we were talking about with Kurt, there's just so much to talk about and so much to think about. But like get going, start playing, use Copilot and maybe not necessarily start immediately on your amazing automating everything that you're doing as a Power BI developer, but start in like Copilot, like, hey, what meetings do I have? How do I prepare for my meetings? How do I make it do a lot of the tedious work that I don't like? And then start thinking about like, hey, I already know prompts. Let's start going into more of the direction of like, how can I start helping it improve my developer journey? And of course, chat with your data is there too. Like, okay, instead of and this is again a more of a different conversation, but like as a BI developer, not just helping me build that AI or helping it build the reports, but how do I make it make sense to my business users? How can they have a good conversation with data? Because as Kurt was mentioning before, having a conversation in Teams directly with your data is what every CFO and exec dreams of. But you have to do it. You have to help them. You have to have it make sense. So very interesting times. I hope you enjoyed it. And until the next one.